Before we get into the story, I'd like to preface this video with a trigger warning. This story contains elements of dissociation and sensory overload. If either of these elements are potentially triggering, please proceed with caution or click off of the video entirely. Itches that crawl under skin, spiders that buzz and burn, by Rings of Moss on Archive of Our Own. Summary. Izuku wakes up one morning and just knows it's gonna be a bad day. Noises are too loud, textures are too off, everything is too bright. How long can he last trying to repress it all? Izuku was having an off day. It started off on the wrong foot and never got corrected. It started when he woke up late, and the sleepy fog was sticky in his head, taking longer to leave than usual. It continued when he tried to brush his teeth. Because the normal brushing and scrubbing that he was used to, instead it felt a bit more grating than usual. It filled his head with slightly too loud sounds, and his gums felt more irritated. He spit out the toothpaste and rinsed his mouth with a small grimace distorting his face. But he shrugged it off and went on with his day. Finishing his morning routine and heading to homeroom just as the fog of sleep finally left his mind. He tried to continue his day as normal, but the bastard that is life, and its friend, Izuku's brain, decided they wouldn't let him. Izuku started off on the wrong foot, and the universe was committed to preventing him from correcting it. Noises would strike too loud in his ears. Chairs would squeak for just a moment, high-pitched and grating. His collar constantly felt too tight and too loose and itchy on his neck. The room felt cold and bristled on his skin, and his hands were dry like cardboard. His senses groaned and squeaked and buzzed in all the wrong ways, but only just barely. Enough for Izuku to feel off. He pushed on through the day, hiding his winces and gripping his pen that little bit tighter. His day was unsettled further when in heroics, he was thrown off at the beginning of the exercise and just couldn't recover for the rest of time. He was frazzled and off-kilter, and his mind felt scattered. He finished the exercise with a mind full of steel-wool static, and his nerves buzzing hot and loud. He managed to half-listen to the scolding he got from Aizawa-sensei, but didn't have the mind to register the worried look that creased his teacher's face. He was too busy trying to just breathe and ignore how there's a little bit of sand inside his shoe. But the school day was over now, and on the walk back to the dorms, Izuku managed to breathe a little easier, and put together some of the pieces in his head that had been scattered all day. When he got back, he retreated to his room to try and get away from all of everything that was going on, to get some semblance of control over his senses. After dropping off his things, Izuku grabbed a change of clothes and his bath caddy and hastily made his way to the showers. He took the long way around to avoid going through the common room, where no doubt there would be some creak of a sliding chair, or the bang of a fallen pot, or Kachan yelling, but he made it to the showers without much fuss. Once he got there, and in the shower, though, he nearly spent 5 minutes trying to adjust the water, but no matter what he did, it either felt frigid on his skin or like he was boiling alive. So, before he wasted any more water, Izuku resigned himself to a bone-chilling shower. He grit his teeth and washed up as fast as he could. By the time he got out, his teeth hurt from chattering and his jaw was sore from clenching. His joints creaked, and the refreshing feeling he felt from being clean was all but moot. His skin felt covered in sharp, tiny pinpricks. Goosebumps raced everywhere he could see. A constant shiver ran through him, and he felt so tense. He scrubbed his skin dry with a towel in an attempt to rub away the needles and warm up his chilled bones, but even after he dried and changed, the pins and needles remained, and the tautness in his muscles refused to fully relax. A few of the boys who were also taking showers gave him slightly concerned looks, but Izuku didn't have the energy or the mind to pay them any attention. All his senses focused inward at his own body. A strangled sigh escaping his tight throat, Izuku made his way back to his room, trying to ignore the creaking in his bones and the full-body tightness that refused to leave him. He was on edge more now than ever, all the little sensory pains that had been building throughout the whole day dangerously close to coming to a head. Izuku found himself heading to the dorm kitchen to get some water, and despite the static in his mind, he managed to grab a glass cup. On days like this, glass cups are the only kind he can tolerate touching. Ceramic or plastic or anything else would just make it all so much worse. He filled his cup from the tap. Cool water, but not frigid. No ice, so he didn't have to hear the loud ice machine or the high-pitched clink of the ice cubes. And leaned against the counter, sipping slowly and trying to focus solely on the gentle soothing of the water running down his throat. His eyes were unfocused for fear of seeing anything, and he tried his best to not listen to anything. Izuku was walking on a tightrope. All day the rope had been getting thinner, and now it was barely a hair's width. He was balanced on a wire, and it was prone to snap at any moment. He tried to take small steps forward, blocking out as many of his senses as he could. He focused on the water, the glass resting against his lips, the condensation collecting around his fingers, the cool, silk liquid pooling in his mouth and running down his throat as he took small, continuous sips. Izuku stood there nearly unmoving, as he tried to soothe the tension in his nerves. He was on a tightrope, surrounded by fog, only seeing in front of him and feeling the tension in the one thing keeping him from falling. He was in a fog, and didn't notice when Kaminari walked by. He still didn't notice when he opened a cabinet and pulled out the bag of croutons and some other chips. When Kaminari opened the bag of croutons and popped one in his mouth, Izuku still had yet to notice. And then, crunch. The sound was loud, too close, grating, bad, unexpected. Twang. One of the threads on Izuku's tightrope snapped, balance completely thrown off, the pressure reaching ahead. Crunch. Twang. Another. Crunch. Twang. Another. Crunch. Twang. Another. Then creak, crack, smash. With the building tension, Izuku's grip on the glass had tightened as well, pulling taut until eventually it shattered in his hand, spilling water all over his clothes and on the floor, glass shards flying every which way. Along with the glass, so too did Izuku's resolve shatter. He slid to the ground, the tightrope completely snapping beneath him, sticky fog overtaking his mind and lighting his nerves on fire. All of his muscles tensed, making his bones creak and groan from the force of it. All the old fractures and breaks he'd ever felt in his bones came flooding back like ghost needles, every explosion burning a phantom pain. He couldn't see. He couldn't focus. His whole body was tense, and everything felt too much, and he couldn't breathe, and he just couldn't. He sat there, shaking on the floor, trying to squeeze everything and nothing. Fists clenching and unclenching, veins popping out dangerously. Unrecognized by Izuku, Kaminari was hovering around him, panicking and unsure of what to do. His attempts to call out fell on deaf ears, blocked by steel wool and ringing. At some point, someone else came into the room. Someone with long black hair and tired eyes who came rushing after his student called, panicking about, "Something's going on with Midoriya and he isn't responding to anything." Aizawa crouched in front of Izuku's unseeing eyes, unregistered vision filled with black hair and stubble and worried eyes. Hey, Izuku, it's me. It's Aizawa-sensei." His voice was calm and even, years of practice letting him keep his worry from daring to breach his voice. "It's Aizawa-sensei. Izuku, can you hear me? Can you see me? It's all right, I'm here. Can you tell me how to help? You're okay. Can you breathe for me?" He continued to speak in a slow, even tone, giving nothing reassurances and sprinkling in questions of how to help. Slowly, the gentle, even rumble began to wear down at the steel-wool cotton in Izuku's ears, and Izuku began to register the low rumble as a voice that was calm and even and safe, a voice that he knew wouldn't change unexpectedly, A constant. It helped. That constant voice gave Izuku something to cling to, something to focus on, to try and reach equilibrium once more. After several long minutes, his eyes cleared somewhat, and he registered Aizawa sitting in front of him. The teacher noticed too, the noticeable clearness in Izuku's eyes, and released a tiny breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Hey kid, Izuku, anything I can do to help?" The question managed to register through the fog still clouding his mind, if a little slowly. His muscles were still too tight though, his bones too creaky and spiderwebbed with pain. Movements jerky, he tapped his palms together and tried to form words. Pressure. His tongue was thick, and his throat clenched, jaw rested near shut. Aizawa watched him intently, patiently listening. He nodded to Izuku. "Pressure? You need pressure." Izuku gave a jerky nod, the words slowly getting easier to process. "Okay. Do you want a hug? A weighted blanket?" Another jerky nod, Aizawa humming in response. "Both, then?" One more nod, and Aizawa turned to Kaminari, who was still hovering nearby, unsure if he should leave or not. Aizawa spoke carefully but urgently, keeping his tone even so he didn't spook Midoriya or trigger him into a relapse. "Kaminari, get the weighted blanket from the common room. Quietly." The blonde nodded quickly and went to go do as told. A moment later, he came back with the heavy, dark blue blanket and passed it to his teacher. Aizawa nodded and silently shooed him from the kitchen. "Okay, kid. I'm gonna wrap the blanket around your shoulders, alright?" He waited for another nod before doing just that, being careful to not accidentally brush any parts of Izuku unexpectedly, like his head or neck. When the blanket was securely wrapped around Izuku, the greenette immediately gripped the edges in his hands and pulled in his legs, making himself as small as possible, wrapped tightly in the weighted blanket. "Alright, kid. You still want contact?" The nod this time was less jerky, slightly more fluid now that Izuku had the blanket to help ground him properly. Aizawa carefully telegraphed his movements as he shifted to sit next to Izuku, pressing his side against the ball child. He huffed out a grunt when Izuku promptly rolled to half lay in his teacher's lap. Recovering quickly, Aizawa set a careful and steadying arm along the kid's back, trying to stay present but not do anything unexpected. Aizawa picked up his low murmurs and reassurances once more, the constant rumble visibly helping soothe Izuku. Slowly, so slowly, the needles receded from his bones, and the hot sticky pain dulled and faded from his skin. The steel wool was all but gone from his ears, and the fog in his mind had cleared significantly. His muscles went from a near constant full-body spasm to a sporadic clenching and unclenching, getting looser each time. Occasionally it flared back, and Izuku would ball up tight once more, trying to press in on himself and force out the pins and needles in his nerves. All the while, Aizawa kept patiently still, a hand rubbing the same consistent pattern into his back. A breathing pattern, Izuku noticed after a time. The timbre and tempo of his rumbles kept remarkably consistent, and an even volume on top of it. Slowly, so slowly, Izuku's mind honed in once more on equilibrium. He teetered and tottered, but he made progress. Progress that was so much faster with a warm body there to keep him grounded. So much less painful than when he was alone in his room trying to keep quiet as his mind swam so he didn't worry his mom. The tightrope was rebuilt, and from it was laid a bridge that Izuku took careful steps across. He slipped and tripped, retreated a few times, but Aizawa held his hand through it. And when, finally, Izuku took that last step to safety, finally reaching solid ground, it felt like all the energy had completely drained from him. Aizawa looked down, his legs long numb, but he couldn't care even if he wanted to see Izuku's face smooth out into something peaceful. A look of serenity that he doesn't think he's ever seen on the boy when conscious. A light snore filled the room as Izuku sank into a blissfully dreamless sleep after an entire day of dancing on a live wire. His bones were loose, his muscles softened, and the pins and needles all shaken out of his nerves. The next morning, Izuku woke up and knew he would have a good day. His mind was clearer than it had been in a long time, and despite the stinging in his hands, he would later remember it was from digging his fingernails into his palms and the shattered glass he drove in with it, thankfully removed by Aizawa at some point the previous day. His pain was far duller than it had been in a long while, old aches fading to the background. He was surprised to find himself in his bed, when he didn't even remember going up there after his shower, but for now that didn't matter. It didn't matter how he got there or why he felt so much better for the moment. No, for the moment, Izuku would just sit and rest. Let his limbs fall where they wanted to. Let his mind and senses wander, and enjoy the peace. Hello everyone, this is IcarusAudios, and I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. You can find Rings of Moss on Archive of Our Own or through the link in the description. If you like the content and want more in the future, click the subscribe button to be notified when a new podfic comes out. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.